Welcome to another episode of Information Return Intelligence. I'm Jason Dinesen. This is the fast moving weekly podcast where we talk about all things related to 1099s and other things in the information return world. And today I wanted to talk about what's coming up here in the month of March of 2026 as far as due dates. There actually are a few things we need to be aware of. We'll talk about what those due dates are and how you can file extensions if you're running out of time on these things and need to buy a little extra time. So January 31st was your due date for 1099 NEC and W-2s. We don't talk about W-2s a whole lot, at least not yet. We may add coverage of W-2s down the road, but not too much right now. But January 31st for the NEC and your W-2s. The other forms that you might need to file, various other types of 1099s plus 1042S, have later due dates. So let's talk about those that are coming up in March. Form 1042S. I'm not going to go into what Form 1042S is. I'm making an assumption that if you have to file it, you know what it is. And if you don't know what it is, it's probably because you haven't had to file it yet. Think of it as the international equivalent of a 1099. So it's a 1099 that goes to a person or a business in another country for various transactions. That is a very simplified view. Of course, it's more complicated than that, but that's like I don't even know if that's the 40,000 foot view. That might be like the 100,000 foot view from the stratosphere. Anyway, your 1042S is due to both the IRS and the other party, so your payee, on March 15th. Now, if you look at the calendar this year, March 15th falls on a Sunday. So actually, the due date is the 16th. Monday, March 16th is your 1042S due date. What if you get toward the 16th and you realize you're not finished with these forms? You need to buy some extra time. There are two forms you would need to file. One is Form 8809. Form 8809 buys you an extra 30 days, 30 days, for filing your 1042S with the IRS. The second type of form you would need to file is Form 15397. So that form is also submitted to the IRS, but that buys you 30 extra days to get the form to the other party. So think of it as there's two deadlines on March 16th for 1042S. Filing with the government, but also getting the form out to your payee. So the 8809 is the form that you file to buy extra time for filing with the IRS. The 15397 buys you extra time to get forms out to your payee for Form 1042S. Also due on the 16th is Form 1042. So the 1042 is a summary form that you have to file relating to your 1042S forms. It's taking all of the numbers off of your 1042S's and rolling them together into a summary form. Here's the issue with the 1042. You can file Form 1042S through the IRS's IRIS or FIRE systems. And logins to that are pretty common as far as organizations having their own logins. Also, it's very common. it's not just common, it's basically how it is. If you use a third-party provider to file your forms like an Avalara or TaxWorks or Sovos or whoever you use for facilitating electronic filing of forms, they can almost certainly handle the 1042S because they're tied to Iris or Fire. So 1042S, it's not that big of a deal to e-file because you use the same systems as for 1099s. Form 1042, however, uses an entirely different system. The IRS for electronic filing has multiple different systems that it uses for receiving electronically filed things. We'll talk about that in a future episode. Form 1042 uses MEF, Modernized Electronic Filing System, MEF, which chances are your organization does not have a login to. It's really intended more for like software companies. When you file your personal tax return or your accountant or H&R Block, TurboTax, whoever's facilitating the filing, they're using software that's hooked to MEF, and that's where your personal tax return goes to. That's where Form 1042 goes to as well. Now, if you're using a platform, so a third party that's facilitating your electronic filings, almost all of them, as far as I know, it might even be all now. There were, as of last fall, I mean, there's many different platforms out there, and I had heard that like all but 2 of them were hooked up to MEF now. You may want to verify that with your provider if you're using a third-party provider. Most of them probably are hooked up to MEF. The bigger issue is that if you do things in-house, I bet that you're not hooked up to MEF. And if you need to file Form 1042, that creates a problem. How are you going to get it e-filed? Because the 1042 is subject to the electronic filing mandate, which means if you have to e-file your 1099s, your 1042S, your W-2s, you have to e-file the 1042. This is the first year that this has been a problem because in the past, the IRS has come out and said, you don't have to e-file it, you can mail it to us. As of the recording of this episode and the air date of March 3rd, we have not received any such exception for 2025 versions of Form 1042. So here's what I would do. If you know you can e-file it and you're going to meet the deadline and get it all done, and you can e-file it because you use one of the providers that can e-file it, go for it. If you do things in-house and you don't have a solution to this, or if you're using a third-party provider who can't handle electronic filing of the 1042, file an extension, and that's a little different process. There's a form called a 7004, and filing that buys you a 6-month extension. It kicks the can all the way to September. That's important to do, not just because it buys you time to figure things out. It also buys time to see if maybe the IRS comes along and says, we're going to allow you to mail it in for 2025, because last year, when they said that you could mail in the 1042, the date that they said that, it was March 18th. It was after the March 15th deadline last year. Actually, the deadline last year, I'm looking at trying to find the calendar for last year. I found the calendar here. March 17th was the due date a year ago. It was the 18th when they came out and said, oh, you can mail it to us. So maybe they'll do something like that last minute, or yeah, that's not even really last minute, is it? That's like after the fact. That's why I say if this is going to be a problem for you, file an extension so that you have bought yourself 6 whole months to deal with this. Then we have your 1099 miscellaneous filings to the IRS. If you need extra time for that, it's Form 8809 again, just like with the 1042S. One thing I would say on that is hopefully you got your 1099 miscellaneous forms out to the other party by January 31st. Because for most of the boxes on that form, January 31st is the deadline to get it to your recipient. You just have a longer period of time to file with the IRS. So there's one other form that can sneak up on you on this, especially if it's your first time, perhaps, of having to deal with this. And this happens with health insurance. If your organization offers health insurance, check with your broker, your insurance provider, whoever it is that handles that stuff or helps you with it, because you might need to issue a form called 1095B. B as in boy, 1095B. And that also has a March 31st due date. And if you're not going to be able to make that date, Form 8809 is what you use. You're also supposed to send the 1095B to the employee by the 31st. And it's Form 15397 is what you use to extend that by another 30 days. So you would need, just like with the 1042S, you would need to file both of those forms. If March 31st is coming up and you're not going to get your 1095B out. 1095s are another thing that we will devote more coverage to at some point down the road, but those are Affordable Care Act filings. And those actually go to another system at the IRS called AIR, AIR, Affordable Care Act Information Returns. So I guess that would be another one. Make sure you have a provider who can handle sending things into the AIR system. And the reason I say that can sneak up on you is just from, I'm not practicing anymore, but when I was, that would come back to haunt some small businesses who were clients of mine and who offered health insurance. And for a while, they had a certain type of insurance where they didn't have to issue anything. And then they changed coverage provisions or something. They changed something. And suddenly they did have a 1095B reporting requirement. So you really want to check on that with your insurance provider, whoever's providing that health insurance. A lot of times they'll reach out to you and say they'll have a file that you can download that has certain information on it that'll help you. The first time you receive that from the insurance company, your reaction might be, what is this? So 1095B is what that is. That'll do it for this week's episode of Information Return Intelligence. I'm Jason Dinesen. Thank you for joining us. We do this every week, so we'll catch you again in another week. Dinesen Media.